Hello, and welcome to Chapter 4, Tissues, the Living Fabric. In Chapter 1, we learned how to study the anatomy of the human body using the organizational hierarchy, beginning at the simplest, which is the chemical level. That level soon progressed into the cellular level, which we studied in Chapter 3. Cells will progress to the tissue level will become the organ level. The organ level will comprise our 11 body systems, organ body systems, that will comprise to make an organism, the human body. We learned in Chapter 3 that human body is made up of many cells, which will characterize it as being multicellular. Because cells are a part of the structural organization of the body, they do not work alone. They form tight cell communities that live and work together. Tissues are groups of cells that are similar in structure and perform a common function. There are 4 primary tissue types that form the fabric of the body. The 4 basic tissues are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. One of the first events of embryonic development is the formation of the 3 primary germ layers. From superficial to deep, these layers are the ectoderm, ecto, superficial, meaning outside, mesoderm, the middle layer, and the innermost layer, which is the deepest layer, endoderm. Endo means within. These 3 primary germ layers then specialize to form the 4 primary tissues: epithelium, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, connective tissue, that make up all body organs. Tissues are organized into organs such as the kidneys and the heart. Most organs contain all 4 tissue types. The study of tissues is called histology. It complements the study of gross anatomy. Together, they provide the structural basis for understanding organ physiology. If we summarize the role of each primary tissue in a single word, we could say nervous tissue controls, muscle tissue moves, epithelial tissue covers, and connective tissue supports. Nervous tissue is found in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. Muscle tissue is found attached to bones, found in the heart, and in the walls of hollow organs. Epithelial tissue lines our digestive tract organs and other hollow organs, glands, and the surface of the skin. Connective tissue is located in our bones, tendons, fat, and other soft padding tissue. There are several characteristics of epithelial tissue. One that is represented on this slide here will include polarity. Polarity all epithelial tissue have 2 surfaces that differ in structure and function. The polarity of epithelial tissue comprises an apical surface and a basal surface. The apical surface is not attached to any surrounding tissue and is exposed to either the outside of the body or the cavity of an internal organ. It is the superior or most superficial surface of the epithelium tissue. The basal surface, which is the bottom layer, deepest layer, is attached to underlying connective tissue. For this reason, we say that epithelial exhibit an apical basal polarity. Epithelial tissue, our first major tissue type of the human body, has 2 parts, just like a first and last name. This is how we will classify our epithelial tissue. The first name indicates the number of cell layers present. Based on the number of cell layers, there are simple epithelial tissue and stratified epithelial tissue. Simple epithelial tissue consists of 1 single cell layer. Stratified epithelial tissue is composed of 2 or more layers stacked on top of each other. Stratified epithelial tissue is common in high abrasion areas where protection is important, such as the skin or the mouth. The epithelial's second name describes the shape of its cells. There are three common shapes of epithelial cells. We have our squamous cells that are flattened and scale-like, with nuclei that has an appearance of a flattened disc. We have our cuboidal cells that are box or cube-like. They are just as tall as they are wide. They have a spherical or round nucleus. And our third type of cell shape would be our columnar cells. They are tall and column-like. They have an elongated or oval-shaped nucleus. Let's now discuss our first example of epithelial tissue, which is simple squamous. Simple squamous epithelial tissue function is absorption, secretion, and filtration. It is found where filtration or the exchange of substances by rapid diffusion is a priority. Simple squamous epithelial tissue is found in the kidneys, the air sac of the lungs, the lining of the heart, blood vessels, and our lymphatic vessels. Simple cuboidal, you can see here's the apical surface of the cell, here's the basal surface. We have one row of cells, although it is in a circular shape. You can see the round plump nucleus. Simple cuboidal epithelium consists of a single layer of cells as tall as they are wide. Important functions of simple cuboidal epithelium are secretion and absorption. Simple cuboidal epithelial tissue can be found in our glands and our kidney tubules. Simple columnar is the third type of epithelial tissue. Simple columnar has a single layer of tall, closely packed cells aligned like soldiers in a row. Here's the apical surface, and here's the basal surface. Their function is absorption and secretion, and they are found in the digestive tract, the small bronchi, the lungs, and the uterine tubes and uterus of the female reproductive system. Moving on to our next type of epithelial tissue, we have our stratified squamous, and remember how and why we classify it. Stratified means that it has multiple layers of cells, and squamous is the type of cell shape that they have. So here's our apical surface, and you can see on the apical surface you have microvilli. That's an extension of our plasma membrane on the apical surface of the cell. And if we go all the way down here through those many layers of cells, we will find our basal surface, the basal surface. Stratified epithelial function primarily is protection, but that's not their only role. It is the most widespread of the stratified epithelial tissues. It is found in areas that are subjected to wear and tear. It forms the external surface of the skin. The outer layer of the skin, which is called the epidermis, is keratinized, meaning its surface cells contain keratin, which is a tough protective protein that dries out the area. The other stratified squamous epithelial tissue found in the body would be considered non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelial tissue, and it is found in the moist linings of the esophagus, the mouth, and the vagina. Hence, the name non-keratinized, meaning it does not have keratin present, meaning that it's not going to dry it out, so it's a moist environment. And the last type of epithelial tissue that we will discuss will be our transitional epithelium tissue. It doesn't have a name that is cohesive with the classification of epithelial tissue. However, transitional epithelial tissue forms the lining of hollow urinary organs, which stretch as they fill with urine. When the organ is distended or stretched with urine, the cell layers are going to form a different or take on a different cell shape appearance. The ability of the cells to change their shape or undergo transition allows a greater volume of urine to flow through a tube-like organ. In the bladder, it allows more urine to be stored. Let's look at a major difference between stratified squamous epithelial tissue and transitional epithelial tissue. Here on the apical surface of the transitional cell, you can see how it is rounded or balloon shaped. There's the apical surface, here's the basal surface. That is different from stratified squamous, which has a flat apical surface. You can see the flat apical surface here of those cells in stratified squamous in comparison to the rounded apical surface of the transitional epithelial cells. Moving on to connective tissue. Connective tissue is the most abundant and widely distributed tissue in the body. There are 4 main classes of connective tissue and several subclasses. These are connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone tissue, and blood. Connective tissue does much more than just connect the body parts. Its major functions include binding and supporting, protecting, insulating, storing reserve fuel, and transporting substances within the body. Connective tissues share 2 characteristics that will set it apart from the other primary tissues found in the human body. Those 2 characteristics include having an extracellular matrix and that it arises from mesenchyme, an embryonic tissue. The extracellular matrix that consists of fibers and ground substance separates the living cells of the tissue. The extracellular matrix allows connective tissue to bear weight, withstand great tension, and endure abuses such as physical trauma and abrasion that no other tissue can tolerate. Ground substance and fibers make up the extracellular matrix. Ground substance is the material that fills the space between the cells and contains the fibers. It has 3 components: the interstitial fluid, the blue that you see here, cell adhesions, and proteoglycans. Proteoglycans are a protein core that includes a carbohydrate, a polysaccharide to be exact. The extracellular matrix also includes fibers. The fibers are collagen fibers, which happen to be the strongest and most abundant. It also includes elastic fibers and reticular fibers. Connective tissue also has cells. Each major class of connective tissue has a resident cell type that exists in an immature and a mature state. The immature cells are going to be called blasts, and the mature cells are going to be called cytes. The blast cells are actively mitotic. The mature cells maintain the health of the extracellular matrix. Some examples of the cells found in connective tissue will be fibroblasts. They're found in connective tissue proper, and they become the mature fibrocytes. Chondroblasts, blasts because they are the immature cartilage cells. they become the mature chondrocytes. Osteoblasts, found in bone, are the cells, and they become osteocytes, the mature bone cells. Blood is the fourth major class of connective tissue, and it is an exception to this generalization. Additional cell types that can be found in connective tissue include adipocytes, commonly known as adipose cells or fat cells. Their function is to store energy as fat. White blood cells, also known as leukocytes, and there's 5 types of leukocytes. They are concerned with protection, tissue response to injury. Another type of cell includes the mast cells, which typically cluster along blood vessels. Their function is to detect foreign microorganisms and initiate local inflammatory responses against them. The mast cells contain granules. These granules secrete chemicals. Those chemicals include heparin and histamine that we use especially during inflammation in severe allergic reactions. And the last cell are the macrophages. Macro means large, phago means to eat or engulf. They are very large, irregularly shaped cells that avidly devour a broad variety of foreign materials, such as bacterium, viruses, mold, fungi. All mature connective tissues except for bone, cartilage, and blood are part of the connective tissue proper. The connective tissue proper has 2 subclasses, loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. For the purposes of this anatomy, we are only concerned with the loose connective tissue proper, adipose tissue. We will look at cartilage, and there's 3 types. We will look at bone and blood to cover connective tissue. Here we see our first example of connective tissue, which is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue's function is to take up or release fat. Without fat storage in our adipose tissue, we could not live for more than a few days without eating. Adipose tissue is certainly abundant. It constitutes about 18% of an average person's body weight. It can develop almost anywhere in the body. For example, it accumulates in the subcutaneous tissue where it can act as a shock absorber. Subcutaneous tissue is the layer of tissue found beneath the skin. It acts as an and as an energy storage site. It also helps prevent heat loss from the body. Additional locations in the body where we can find adipose tissue include surrounding the kidneys, behind the walls, and in genetically determined locations such as the abdomen, the hips, and the breast. Adipose tissue. Our next major class of connective tissue will include our cartilage. Cartilage stands up to both tension and compression. It is tough but flexible. It provides a resilient rigidity to that structure it supports. Cartilage lacks nerve fibers and it is avascular, a characteristic that epithelial tissue also has. Avascular means without a blood supply. Connective tissue is typically vascular. It is highly vascularized, meaning that it has a blood supply to provide nourishment, gases, hormones, and hyaline cartilage, or cartilage itself, happens to be an exception to that characteristic of all the other connective tissues. Cartilage has chondroblasts, the immature predominant cell type in growing cartilage, where they're going to mature into chondrocytes. 3 types of cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Let's begin with our hyaline cartilage. It is the most abundant cartilage in the body. It has large numbers of collagen fibers present in it. It provides firm support with some pliability. It is located in a number of key places within the human body. It covers the ends of our long bones, and it is titled articular hyaline cartilage, where it absorbs compression at our joints. It supports the tip of the nose, where it's called nasal cartilage. It connects to the ribs of the sternum, the breastbone, where we call it costal hyaline cartilage. It supports most of the respiratory system passage, especially the larynx, where we call it laryngeal cartilage, and the trachea, where it's called tracheal cartilage. And it makes up most of the embryonic skeleton before bone forms in a growing baby in utero. Elastic cartilage is the second type of cartilage. It is found with having the characteristic features of elastic fibers. Hyaline cartilage has collagen fibers. Elastic fibers or elastic cartilage has elastic fibers. It is found where strength and exceptional elasticity or stretchability are needed. Elastic cartilage forms the external ear and the epiglottis, which is a structure along your respiratory passageway that covers the opening when swallowing. Elastic cartilage, elastic begins with the letter E, and also the locations of where it's found in the body. The ear, that begins with the letter E, and epiglottis, which begins with the letter E. You can see the elastic fibers, these black strands that is found in the histological view of our elastic cartilage. Fibrocartilage contains collagen fibers, just like our hyaline cartilage. It resists both compression and tension. It is found where strong support and the ability to withstand heavy pressure is required. Examples of the locations where it's found in the body where that is needed, where we bear the majority of our body weight, such as our vertebral column. Our vertebral column is made up of vertebrae, and in between each vertebrae you have a disc called the intervertebral disc, and that is made up of fibrocartilage. To withstand the heavy pressure, and it often offers resilience and cushion to the bones that form the column. It is also found in the knee joint, where the knee joint bears the majority of the body weight. It is found in the meniscus of the knee joints. Another example of connective tissue would include bone. Osteo means osseous, also means bone. Bone tissue has an exceptional ability to support and protect body structures. Our bones of the skeleton provide cavities for storing fat and synthesizing blood cells. Another function of bone is to act as attachment sites for our skeletal muscles. Also to act as a storage reservoir for calcium and other minerals. Bone tissue has a bone matrix that is harder and more rigid. It has collagen fibers as well as inorganic calcium salts. It includes osteoblasts, the immature bone cells. Those immature bone cells will develop into osteocytes, the mature bone cells. The osteocytes are found within a structure called a lacunae. And our bone tissue has these circular, closely packed structural units called osteons that look like tree rings or the bark of a tree. That is a characteristic feature of bone, specifically compact bone tissue. And our bone tissue is located within all the bones of the body. Blood is also an example of connective tissue. It is atypical connective tissue because it actually is a fluid. It is located within our blood vessels. It does not connect things or give mechanical support. It is classified as connective tissue because it develops from mesenchyme and consists of blood cells surrounded by a non-living fluid matrix, the blood plasma. The vast majority of blood cells are red blood cells that are present within the blood. Also present within the blood are white blood cells and also platelets. Blood functions as the transport vehicle for the cardiovascular system. It carries nutrients, waste, respiratory gases, and hormones. This is blood, and that completes all of your examples for connective tissue. Moving on to the third major tissue found within the human body, muscle tissue. It is responsible for body movement. Muscle tissues are well vascularized tissues that are responsible for most types of body movement. Its muscle cells possess myofilaments. Myo means muscle, which are elaborate networks of actin and myosin filaments that bring about movement or traction in all cell types. We have three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Because skeletal muscle contraction is under our conscious control, skeletal muscle is often referred to as voluntary muscle. Skeletal muscle is attached to our bones. They contract and pull on bones or skin, causing body movements. Skeletal muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. You can see that they are aligned in a continuous sheet of cells. They are cylindrical. They contain many peripherally located nuclei. Their obvious banded or striated appearance, dark pink, light pink, dark pink, reflects the precise alignment of the myofilaments, actin and myosin. Cardiac muscle, because it is out of our conscious control, we consider it an involuntary muscle. It is found only in the walls of the heart. Its contractions help propel blood through the blood vessels to all parts of the body. And like skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle cells are also striated. They're less observable, but nonetheless, you can see the striations here. Cardiac muscle cells also are branched. The cells fit together tightly at unique junctions called intercalated discs. This is a unique feature of cardiac muscle only. Here you can see the branching. You can see that we don't have continuous sheets of muscle cells. And generally, cardiac muscle cells only have one or two nuclei. Smooth muscle is so named because its cells have no visible striations. The cells here are spindle-shaped or tapered at each end, gives this wavy-like appearance. It too is not under our voluntarily controlled conscious, so it is considered an involuntary muscle, just like cardiac. It is found mainly in the walls of hollow organs other than our hearts, because our heart will have cardiac muscle only. It can be found in our digestive tract, our urinary tract organs, the uterus, and the walls of our blood vessels. And this completes our 3 types of muscle tissue. Moving on to our 4th and final tissue. Nervous tissue is the main component of the nervous system, found in the brain cord and our nerves, which regulates and controls our body functions. It contains 2 major cell types, the neurons, which have a cell body, a nucleus, and cell processes. The other major cell type found in nervous tissue would be our neuroglial cells, the little dark brown small dots that you see on this slide. Our neurons are highly specialized nerve cells that generate and conduct nerve impulses. They respond to stimuli and they transmit electrical impulses over substantial distances within the body. The neuroglial cells, or supporting cells, are non-conducting cells, and they carry out the function of support, insulating, and protecting our neurons. That completes the 4 major tissue types of the body. Your objective there was to list several structural and functional characteristics of each type of tissue, name, classify, and describe the various examples of each and indicate their chief functions and location within the body. In your more detailed PowerPoint, please define gland, differentiate between exocrine and endocrine glands, describe the structure and function of cutaneous, mucous, and serous membranes, and our last objective, which will be covered now, is to outline the process of tissue repair. The body has many techniques for protecting itself from uninvited guests or injury. Mechanical barriers such as the skin and mucosa, the cilia of epithelial cells lining our respiratory tracts, and the strong acid, which serves as a chemical barrier produced by our stomach glands, represent defenses at the body's external boundaries. When tissue is injured or damaged, these barriers are penetrated. This stimulates the body's inflammatory and immune responses. Tissue repair requires that cells divide and migrate, activities that are initiated by growth factors released by injured cells. Repair occurs in 2 major ways: regeneration and fibrosis. Regeneration is defined as replacing destroyed or damaged tissue with the same kind of tissue. Fibrosis is defined as replacing the damaged or destroyed tissue with scar tissue. Whichever of these major repairs occur depends on the type of tissue damaged and the severity of the injury. The repair process follows healing of a wound, cut, scrape, or puncture that breaches an epithelial barrier. There are 3 stages. The first stage is the inflammation stage. Inflammation occurs after trauma causes the injured tissue cells, mast cells, and other cells to release the inflammatory chemicals. The inflammatory chemicals are going to cause our local blood vessels to dilate and also leak, which will allow our white blood cells, our fluid clotting proteins, and our plasma proteins to seep into the injured area to carry out their functions. The platelets that leak are going to clot off the injured area, and it's going to prevent further bacteria, toxins, and other harmful substances from getting into your damaged tissue or entering the body. On the surface of the epithelial tissue that was damaged, the clot is exposed, and as the air dries, it forms a scab. The formation of a scab is a part of the tissue repair process. Do not peel the scab off. You are going to prevent the further healing repair of the tissue. The second step is the organizational stage, where we're going to restore the blood supply. The blood clot is replaced by the ingrowth of fragile capillaries that are characteristic of granulation tissue that you see here. This restores the vascular supply. Our fibroblast cells, those immature cells, are going to produce collagen fibers that is going to bridge the damaged edges of the injured tissue. When healing is complete, the fibroblasts will revert back to their resting stage or undergo a process called apoptosis, which is cell suicide. The macrophages, the very large cells, are going to continue to eat dead and dying cells and prevent or eat up any other debris that entered into the site. The surface epithelial cells will multiply and begin to migrate over the granulation tissue, replacing the scab, which leads us to our third step of tissue repair. The fibrosed area matures and contracts, pulling the margins of the wound together. You can see that the damaged area is no longer seen. As it regenerates, the epithelium thickens under the scab, which has since detached. A fully regenerated epithelial surface and underlying area of scar tissue results. And this completes tissue repair. Given good nutrition, good circulation, and relatively infrequent wounds and infections, our tissues normally function efficiently through youth and middle age. But with increasing age, epithelial tissue starts to thin out and is more easily breached. Tissue repair is less efficient, and bone, muscle, and nervous tissue begin to atrophy, particularly when a person is not physically active. This completes your Chapter 4 discussion about tissues. This will also complete the information that will be assessed for understanding on your first lecture exam. It is my assumption that because I haven't received visits from you guys in our virtual Zoom office hours, or received many emails about questions for further clarification and understanding of the material that has been presented in Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and now Chapter 4, you are well prepared for your first Anatomy and Physiology lecture and laboratory exam. Thank you, and have a great day.